is that there's a component of this where I guess the mastheads in the past for news media were set up in a centralized environment. So the technology at the time, printing press, news broadcast was around technology to do with radio towers, etc. There was only certain companies that had the capacity to be able to access that technology, and as a result, it was kind of centralized around certain corporations and outlets being able to deliver through those technologies. So all the news got funneled, like, infamously in America, it's always, the three big networks. They all broadly kind of said the same thing, and you could trust it. And that was in the past, and it was around the centralized model of what's going on. What the internet's effectively done has decentralized it. In not fully, not all the way, as we'll get to, but the decentralized impact of it is that now anyone can get in front of a camera and report the news. And I've seen plenty of YouTube people, spouting their reactions and opinions on, the news of the day, and whether it's Fauci and his Wuhan lab research and funding, and or the erosion of civil liberties relating to anything to do with COVID, and all these kinds of reactions. And in some cases, I think they're overreactions. There's no balanced approach or single source of truth, but the mechanism to set up a decentralized accurate source of news is not there, because we're sort of halfway in between the centralized model and what this eventual decentralized model will be. And now we've just got a mess at the moment of not knowing what we can listen to.
Completely agree. And I still, for the life of me, do not understand why governments around the world are not, identifying Facebook as a publisher for interest. Facebook is not singularly, responsible for what's happened. The internet totally, and the way we consume our news, and probably, the way that as humans we're susceptible to, I guess, access things that we want and things that make us feel a certain way as we consume what should be just objective news, are all part of the equation. But when you've got platforms that allow individuals to basically push whatever sort of point of view that they want, and you've got an echo chamber algorithm that amplifies that, it's just not good enough. And I think the other point that was made in that article that was very interesting as well was that people see the news as biased, and they see it as either a left-wing publication or a right-wing publication, and they don't realise that really all it is media entertainment, thinly disguised as information, and it's certainly not reliable information. And really, when you look at some of these people, I'm not even sure it's real entertainment.
Exactly, apart from outrage generation.
That's right. So, and I do think that the social platforms and Google as well just allow it to be too easy to get away with these things. And then we have laws in Australia, like we did this week, where if somebody posts a comment on your post, you could be liable. And I still don't understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I guess sort of moving it along too, if we explore that concept of decentralization a bit more, there was that other sort of essay that we were reading in relation to blockchain technology and peer-to-peer kind of technologies, sort of like transitioning from what would be considered Web 2.0, which is now, and what we're kind of talking about here, to a 3.0 version where if you think of a true decentralized system, that's where the kind of checks and balances can come in. So there isn't an overall centralized authority, but the technology enables a system where everyone contributes to the it's not the right word, but the regulation of what will work properly, which I actually thought was kind of interesting. And, to bastardize an analogy here, I mean, everyone knows what Bitcoin is. So it's kind of that principle where, the bank got taken out of the equation for being able to do currency transactions and financial transactions. So if you start to apply that across the board using that kind of technology, that the potential for, I guess, providing a better alternative system could potentially be there if it's implemented properly. But it's the idea that of the technology has moved us along to a point where you can't rely on the centralized sort of model anymore, because that's like old school technology. New school technology puts all of this in the hands of everybody, whereas in the past it didn't. So there needs to be a different way of being able to manage all of this stuff, so that, we can still maintain some sort of, functioning civil democracy or something like that.
Well, this is absolutely right. It's a really, really interesting model potentially, say, for regulating, communications on the internet. So, for instance, blockchain model, I can probably still conceal my identity, but validate my identity at the same time. And therefore, if there is a news event, I can show where I got my news from. I can show or link to the sources that are forming my opinion. So I can validate my claim potentially in this. Where I think this sort of model will fall down in the short term is people adopting it. It'd be great for legitimate news sources to use something like a blockchain sort of validation method, but nobody who has anything to hide would want it, because in blockchain everybody can see. So if you're doing something dodgy, or if you've got a particular axe to grind, or if you're just making up news, potentially a system like this would out you, because you wouldn't be able to claim any sort of currency in information. So it's a very interesting,
and that might be a potential virtue, maybe, in that sense, for anyone wanting that level of transparency.
Oh, exactly. So you would think that I don't know how the system would work. Someone would need to work out the system of how you could validate news or currency.
Yeah.
And opinion via that. You could literally show or document how you came to your opinion, which I think a lot of people, on the internet who comment on vaccines or climate change or anything else, diets, nutrition, that sort of thing, don't have any way to validate their claims, let alone even tell us what their qualifications are or why they might even know something on the topic. So it would be quite an interesting way for maybe media to reclaim, I guess, an objective point of view from the wider medium. But we'll have to wait and see how this would come out,
and maybe potentially giving rise to legitimate other voices too. In that, because they would have access to the same sort of technology to be able to do it.
Well, that's right. But even if you're someone like Josh Rogan, for instance, you would assume that he would, somewhere plug into this bit chain and effectively his points of view, his stories, what he's commenting on, you'll be able to see where that story came from. What was the original source of this story? And then what were all his episodes that relate to that story as well? So you'll see him flip-flop perhaps, and if you go back to validate him yourself. So it could be quite an interesting and useful tool.
Well, I did I did enjoy the analogy that was in that essay, where they basically use the anthill analogy, where goodness comes from the sum of its parts, all the little ants contributing their little bit, which is a kind of a positive, optimistic view of how it could potentially work.
Well, that's right, validating, and perhaps it's even a way longer term to stop the really insidious trolls controlling that occurs on the internet. We can only hope.